Michael Kugelman is a senior program associate for South and Southeast Asia for the Wilson Center's Asia program. He joins us to debrief President Modi's visit to the United States. Michael, welcome back. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to begin with a couple of headlines. In preparation for speaking with you, I was scanning the headlines around the country and the world. I'll share a few with you, and then we'll see what your headline would be. High on rhetoric, low on substance. Clarifies the new normal in U.S.-India relations. No breakthrough, but no sellout. And here's one from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Modi's U.S. visit confirms the nation's pivotal role. What do you think? How would you headline this if you were the headline writer?
There are elements of truth to all of those. I would essentially say something like not necessarily substantive, but still significant. And that's because there were no big ticket announcements. There were no major deals. There were no major agreements, and no one really expected that. But it was a significant visit because it was meant to essentially highlight that this relationship between India and the United States is sufficiently strong that it can weather or withstand any major leadership transitions in the U.S. Basically, it was meant to suggest that there's enough goodwill and trust in the relationship that it doesn't matter who's going to be occupying the White House after Obama. The relationship is in a very good place, and it's only going to improve. And I think that was accomplished.
And you know, there are multiple audiences for these events. How did it play back in India?
Generally very well. I think that it was a prestige factor for many Indians, just really happy to see their prime minister standing before a joint session of Congress, getting huge numbers of applause. There were several dozen ovations. It was really unbelievable. And I think that Indians were really pleased to see not just the fact that he was standing up there giving a speech, but that it was received very well. I mean, there was bipartisan support for it. You didn't hear any boos. You didn't see any congressmen sitting there not really applauding. Everyone seemed impressed. And, you know, he walked into a standing ovation. After his speech, Modi actually was signing autographs for some congressmen. It was almost like he was a superstar, which he is in many regards in Washington, which is highly ironic given what had happened, you know, not too long ago.
So subsequent to the visit, the Senate fails to recognize India as a global strategic and defense partner, the exact language in the National Defense Authorization Act. It seems sort of contradictory to the reception that Congress provided for President Modi when he was here.
Yeah.
What are the implications of this? Does this have any negative impact on the relationship?
No, I mean, no. There are going to be a number of efforts, additional efforts in Congress to try to raise the stature of India in terms of how it's regarded as a partner toward the United States. And, you know, maybe one piece of legislation failed, but there are other things in the pipeline. There's, for example, a significant defense deal that would allow India and the United States to use each other's military bases for refueling and things like that. This is the type of deal, it's regarded as a logistics deal that the U.S. tends to expect its top defense partners to sign. And India has held out for a number of years, but it hasn't happened yet. Some have thought this type of deal would have been announced during his visit. It was not. But I think that there will be an agreement here. So this shows that, you know, there's going to be trial and error. Some efforts will fail in Congress, and there'll be success in other regards.
So what other things should we know about the visit? Were there things discussed that we haven't discussed yet, or that weren't as high on the radar screen for reporters?
Well, I mean, what was striking is that there really was not, there were no headline-generating big-ticket announcements. There were some expectations that there would be an agreement on allowing the Westinghouse company to provide nuclear reactors, or to build nuclear reactors in India, which would allow a civil nuclear accord signed between the U.S. and India many years ago to finally be operationalized, but it wasn't. But I think that the big thing to keep in mind here is that both leaders underscored how natural this relationship really is, and not to be rhetorical and, you know, resort to the type of heady language that you tend to hear, but, you know, there's all this focus on you know, shared democratic values. Modi in his speech to Congress kept referring to people like Abraham Lincoln. He was quoting Walt Whitman. The idea here was to essentially emphasize that, you know, beyond transactional matters, beyond things like, you know, selling arms and things like that, there's just a lot of deep-seated shared beliefs, bedrock beliefs between these two countries. It's always been the case. And, you know, when previous prime ministers of India have stood before joint sessions of Congress, they made the same comments. But I think the timing was particularly important now, because there is a bit of unease, particularly in the U.S., that once Obama is no longer in power, that could have bad implications for the U.S.-India relationship. But I don't think that's true at all.
So the timing has to do with the U.S. election.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the ceremonial nature versus the substantive nature,
Mm-hmm.
was that all by design?
It was, but also there were some differences because Modi. This is the eighth time that he met with Obama, for example. He's made many visits to the U.S. since he became prime minister. But I would actually argue that his previous visits to the U.S. were more ceremonial and were more symbolic, were more fraught with pageantry. I mean, for example, many of his previous visits to the United States, he's had these huge gatherings with members of the Indian American diaspora. Mm-hmm. He spoke to a huge crowd in Madison Square Garden. It was mostly diaspora members. It was striking that on this visit, he didn't have any events like that. It was like he meant business.
So it's part of the message that this has become routine because this is the nature of the relationship between the countries?
Right, exactly. And I think it was meant to send a message that if India is really serious about showing how significant it considers its relationship with the United States, it needs to speak to the American people, and that goes beyond meeting with members of the Indian American community.
So no matter what happens in the upcoming election, what are the issues to watch between the two countries moving forward?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a lot of reason to think that the defense relationship between the two countries is really moving forward. I think that what we're going to be seeing is an intensified effort by the U.S. government to complete this rebalance to Asia. And that envisions a very significant role for India, envisioned by the U.S. as a counterbalance to China. India is also increasingly concerned about China, its activities in the South China Sea. So I think that's going to be the big thing. But that said, this is not a problem-free relationship. And I think what we will see in the months ahead and in the years ahead is some tensions in the relationship over how far this cooperation should go. I think the U.S. certainly envisions joint patrols. When it thinks about its key defense partners, it envisions these partners being willing to fight wars alongside the U.S. India doesn't want to go there. It's not into alliance politics. Mm-hmm. It wants to focus on arms sales. It wants to focus on technology transfers in the defense sector, but it's not really ready to fight wars alongside the United States. And so that's going to become an issue. I think ironically, as the relationship gets stronger, there could be more tensions generated.
Is there? Do you anticipate any? I said that was the final question, I think, but I'll ask a final question. Do you anticipate any wiggle room there from India's perspective, or is this a hard and fast commitment to not participating in the types of military activities you describe?
Yeah, I mean, the word from New Delhi is that the current Modi administration is willing to finally move away from this non-alignment policy, which has really guided Indian foreign policy for years, which essentially means it's not going to get into any alliance-like arrangements, and particularly not with a country like the United States. But Modi, from what I understand, is willing to move away from that. He's not necessarily in a position to, sign a defense
treaty. Unilaterally.
Yeah, nothing like that. But I do think that there is a bit of wiggle room that we hadn't seen in previous years.
Interesting. Okay, well, you'll be monitoring it and telling us about it as it progresses. Michael, thanks for joining us as always.
Thank you.